Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Senator Kevin Cramer joins me now. Kevin, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm in the swamp, so never as well as when I'm at home, but it's going well.
I will tell you, I feel just over. I've been struggling during the Trump era. I think it's just it seems like we're focusing on so many silly things that I don't even really care about that much. It just seems we're obsessed about that. For instance, this week, I was very disappointed because over the weekend and into this current week, the big focus was on sort of a renewed public litigation of the Kavanaugh confirmation. There was
right.
It wasn't even. A lot of people thought it was a news article. It was a book excerpt.
Right.
That apparently, according to a report by, what was it, Vanity Fair? I think it was Vanity Fair that broke that story. The New York Times news side rejected it and kicked it over to the opinion/book excerpt side. This story about Brett Kavanaugh. There's a new book coming out, and I guess it's got some new alleges to have some new revelations. And one of them was that there was now a fourth woman who says that Kavanaugh exposed himself or something like that, except left out of the initial, not even report, but I guess book excerpt that they published, which a lot of people took to be like a news article. Left out of it was the fact that this woman, A, wasn't talking about this situation, and B, according to people that the book's authors interviewed around her, says that she doesn't even remember the incident. So everybody's talking about that, and we're still talking about it. It's still dominating the news cycle. Meanwhile, half of Saudi Arabia's oil production facilities were taken out by drone strikes, apparently Iranian drones, although Iran is denying any involvement. One of these stories, to me, Kevin, is a lot more important than the other, and yet our national attention is on one and not the other.
So I share your frustration, and I think there's some of it's cultural, some of it is the new media, if you will, that you've been a part of from the beginning. Actually, you've been a pioneer in it. I think has changed the competitive landscape in the media. So some of the more traditional, some might even say reliable journalists, oriented media have tried to compete by being more sensational, and they've combined the editorial page with the front page, or confused it, maybe is better, and then that spawns all kinds of things, and I think we're on a bit of a spiral. I totally agree. I don't know if I've told you this story or not. Maybe I did, but just before the August recess, when I was going to the floor for the final votes of the summer, a gaggle of reporters gathered around me to ask me about the latest Trump tweet, and I was exasperated, and I said, "Who cares? Nobody cares." Anyway, I had a political reporter that was part of that gaggle ask me. She said, "Do you get frustrated with us when we always ask you about the Trump tweets?" And I said, "A little bit," but I said, "What frustrates me more isn't that you asked me about the Trump tweets. What frustrates me is that the same week, the EPW committee, Environment and Public Works Committee that I'm on, passed the largest highway bill in the country's history, 27-0, and it was so negotiated. It has to be, you get 27-0, that it actually has it has some regulation relief in it for those of us on the right, and it has a climate chapter for those on the left." And I said, nobody was interested in the 27-0 highway bill vote. And so I'm with you. I mean, the illustration you use is an important one too. And when everything that's going on this week is going on this week, it's hardly interesting to hear about uncorroborated book excerpt that now the New York Times itself has had to walk back.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think it's easier for a lot of people to talk about than what's going on in the Middle East because, and in fact, let's talk about it because
I think you're making a good point.
If Iran isn't, and again, they're denying it, but it's Iran,
right.
So I don't know. I'm skeptical of anything Iran says. So, but it was Iranian drones that attacked Saudi oil facilities, roughly half. Now, the good news is, yesterday I think there was some panic about gas prices. I think people were filling up their tanks. I mean,
right.
But it seems like they got things back online pretty fast. The markets don't really seem to have been affected that much. Which, by the way, let's talk about this first. I think part of that, I think part of sort of the market stability, while there was less panic, is because the United States is now basically neck and neck with Saudi Arabia when it comes to oil exports. I mean, we are producing so much oil in the United States, our oil industry has become so resurgent. I feel like it's stabilized things, right? Because there's now a flood of oil on the market from a place that is stable. So we're socially stable, we're politically stable. Our oil production, obviously we have debates about regulations and there's the fights over the pipelines and everything else. But for the most part, compared to the Middle East, we're pretty stable. We're pretty good, and that just stabilizes everything. That's a good thing, right?
Well, yes, it's a very good thing. And so you go back to the days of peak oil and a ban on exporting, and suddenly we have shale revolution. The United States, including Dakota, playing a major role in it, becoming the number one producer of oil and gas in the world. On top of that, we lift the oil export ban. So now we become, as I said throughout that debate, and I was extremely involved in it, as you recall, it would say that the United States will be the global stabilizing force when we're in the global marketplace. And that's exactly what's happening. Just imagine, over half of the capacity of Saudi Arabia was taken out by these UAVs and missiles, and it only affected 5% of the global supply. And while there was a spike on one day, of course, I think, and it was quite a spike, but $5-6 for a barrel of gas, for a barrel of oil, it came down today. And that would never have happened. It would never have happened in the 70s. It wouldn't have happened in the 90s. It wouldn't have happened until the shale revolution, along with lifting the oil export ban and the U.S. being a global player. No question about it.
Now, that being said, obviously, oil is a global market, and what happens in the Middle East does impact the markets. If it's thankfully, Saudi Arabia was able to get things back online pretty quickly, so that's good news. What do we do about Iran long term?
Yeah, so it's an important point. First of all, we don't have to do anything in the immediate term, and I think that's important for people to know. Iran is a major emerging threat, but they are not currently a major threat. Now, make no mistake, what they pulled off, and just so for full disclosure, I have read the CIA brief, the classified brief on the evidence, and I had a lunch meeting today with the vice president where he even went a little bit further, so that people know Iran clearly has more capacity, more military capacity than some people once thought. Their ability to fly UAVs and land-based missiles with the type of precision that they used is not a trifling matter. That doesn't mean, however, that they're a superpower, but they have definitely enhanced their military capacity in recent years.
Is there any? Let me pause you there. Is there any question Iran was responsible for this?
Well, let me just. I'm gonna use the same restraint Donald Trump has been using, and I give him a lot of credit for it. Having seen the classified report, the early indications are that they are at least involved in it. If they didn't do it, my sense of it is that they did do it from their own soil. Just knowing how well done it was, it's impossible that the Ayatollah, in my view, didn't know about it and didn't approve it. So any deniability, I think, is difficult for them. But we'll find out more, as the president has been very aggressive about the intelligence agencies getting all of the facts and all of the evidence, working with the allies. Saudi Arabia's, of course, intel people are on the ground, obviously out there. So we'll know, without a doubt before long. But every indication is that they did it, and at the very least they're in on it. I mean, one thing about it, Rob, there's very little that they can do now that we don't see in one way or another. And of course, there's the forensic evidence after the strike. It's the parts of the missiles, the aircraft. It's just not that difficult to trace back.
Saudi Arabia is obviously an ally of ours. They're an allies of ours.
Yeah.
Not a perfect one by any stretch of the imagination,
right.
But
for sure,
they're an ally of ours. They have helped facilitate some of our efforts in the Middle East, both to stabilize oil supplies there, because let's face it, that's a big reason why we've been in there in the past, and our efforts to combat terrorism and some of the other things that we've done there. If Saudi Arabia comes under attack, direct military attack by Iran, do we go to war?
Yeah, great question, because and I was going to make that point, and thanks for raising it. I mean, Saudi Arabia is an ally most of the time, although not a perfect one, as you said. The enemy of our enemy is our friend in the case of Iran, for sure. We are a big part of Saudi Arabia's defense. They buy a lot of our stuff, obviously, a lot of our weapon systems and whatnot. But the attack was not on the United States of America, and this is why it's really important. Frankly, it's important we're having this podcast discussion, because I think a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, would rightfully question what our response ought to be. As I said earlier, we don't need an immediate response. We should be building the alliance for a response. It ought to be a measured response. The president has been remarkably measured when it comes to Iran. Remember earlier in the year when some people thought we should attack Iran for a drone attack. We did not, or rather, for shooting down a U.S. drone. We did not. So we have the time to have a measured response, to gain the confidence of our allies, both in the Middle East and in Europe. All of that's important. You ask what to do about Iran. They are an emerging threat. And remember, much of what they are able to do now with this precision and sophisticated equipment is because of the Iran nuclear deal. Some people are arguing that the U.S. should never have gotten out of it. I would argue that the U.S. should never have gotten into it, because part of getting into it and releasing so much money to them is what's allowed them to build up their conventional weapons systems while they take a short time out of their nuclear ambitions. And so we've helped facilitate this in many respects, and the president was right to get us out of that deal. But not only do we have Saudi Arabia, but remember, Iran's real ambition is to take out Israel. So at some point, if the United States and other Western allies and Middle Eastern allies don't deal with Iran, the existential threat is to Israel, and they will deal with them. And at that point, I think we get sucked into a war that we might not want. Well, we definitely wouldn't want, Rob. So what do we do? Back to what do we do? That's your question. We have to reestablish a deterrent to Iran. And whatever that might look like, it's better than war. But we have to establish with Iran that a strong enough deterrent that they don't start thinking that they can miscalculate the United States resolve or our allies' resolve.
Deterrent. Give me an example. What's a deterrent?
Presence, ability to strike quickly. You think of our nuclear deterrent, for example. The U.S. and several other nuclear-armed countries have been able to keep a nuclear war from breaking out, largely because we all have the ability to respond. So I'd say by a deterrent, I mean just the type of military presence that incents Iran not anything foolish. What exactly that would look like, I don't know, but they have to know without a doubt that we are both capable and willing to strike if they misbehave too much. And I don't know that they believe that right now. You often hear the term miscalculation. What people mean by that is the concern that they will miscalculate. Iran would miscalculate the United States' response, and they should not test that. Now, some people might argue that Iran wants to incent a war of some sort, that would get their allies on their side, and maybe they could somehow benefit from that. But we certainly want to do everything we can through strength as well as negotiation and diplomacy to to not have that happen.
Let's move on and let's talk about Kavanaugh for a minute, because unlike a lot of the sort of tweet of the day outrage that the media seems obsessed with, there is legitimately a question here. Like, the Senate confirmed Brett Kavanaugh. The Senate, in fact, has a constitutional responsibility in the confirmation of federal judges. So Brett Kavanaugh was, and in fact, this was a consequential issue in your United States Senate race. You weren't North Dakota Senator at the time that vote happened. Your opponent last year, Heidi Heitkamp, was. She voted for Brett Kavanaugh. Some people could argue, and there's always a lot of factors that go into these things, but that was really the beginning of the end of her political career when she cast that vote. Kavanaugh's come back. Any regrets? I mean, has anything that's come out? I mean, let's just. I don't think there are, but I mean, do you have any regrets about supporting Kavanaugh? You obviously didn't vote for him, but you supported him. You felt he was the right pick vocally. Any regrets in that?
Yeah. No, a couple of things. First of all, I would submit to you that Senator Heitkamp's vote for Brett Kavanaugh wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the end. The end for her. It was the exclamation point on her career.
Well, I meant the vote was the end, but okay.
Yeah, I hear you. Anyway,
the actual the ballot vote, the election was the end.
Right.
But yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Sure. So what I would say, no, I don't, because again, you have the information you have at the time that the Senate is confirming, or what we really want to call it is advising. It's advise and consent, of course. And all of the evidence at that time pointed to confirmation. Now, there's nothing new in these new allegations that would overturn that. But I think it is important to point out, Rob, and I do think this gets to maybe one of your concerns about the Trump era, and that is we don't know whether it's true or not. I don't know whether the allegation is true or not. It's not corroborated. As you said, the supposed victim doesn't even recall the incident. The person making the claim was a lawyer for the Clintons. I mean, there's lots of reasons to be suspicious of the claim, but it doesn't mean or prove that it didn't happen.
Right. And
it certainly doesn't prove that it did happen. All of that said, instead of the tribes going to their corners, we ought to be having a more reasonable discussion about it. And unfortunately, we're living at a time when people go to their corners. I mean, the New York Times, for crying out loud, while they kicked it from the news section to the book review section, if you will, they nonetheless were all too happy to run with the story that they eventually had to walk it back. So maybe there's a lesson for all of us on all sides of politics to just take our time a little bit more rather than making assumptions and going to our corners and duking it out.
I feel like a big part of the problem is everybody's just ride or die on both sides, right? Like, that's our guy, and nobody's ever going to... And I honestly, I have not seen anything come out. I don't believe the accusations against Kavanaugh. They're just not substantiated. Right. It's just not enough. If there were a group of people and they all had witnesses, and the witnesses were saying, yeah, I was there, it happened, okay, well, now we got a problem. But so far we have... It's the accusations are a problem. My Sunday column's actually about this. So if people want to read more about what I hear, you could read my column on Sunday. But to me, those problems. But so I don't see that there's a problem with Kavanaugh and defending Kavanaugh. But I do think that the problem is there's just nobody wants to let anything go. Nobody wants to ever believe the other side. Nobody ever wants to say, well, let's all join together and admit that, while I may not like Brett Kavanaugh's judicial philosophies, I may not think he was the right pick for the Supreme Court, the guy's not a rapist, and we haven't reached that threshold. We don't seem to be willing to do that anymore, as witnessed by the fact that how many candidates in the Democratic Party's 2020 field have now called for the man to be impeached or to resign, based on a New York Times book excerpt that was missing some pretty pertinent information, like the fact that the person who this supposedly happened to apparently can't even remember that it happened.
No, it's egregious, and you're exactly right. It's tribalism. It's also much worse in the Trump era than it's ever been before. Listen, I was not a big fan of Barack Obama's, but I never hated the man. Whenever I was with him, I
Yeah.
enjoyed being with him.
I always admonished other conservatives when they would do that. They go, "Oh, Barack Obama's not my president." I never liked that. Barack Obama was absolutely.
No, I never did either.
He was duly elected. Yeah. He was absolutely my president. There were times when I supported him. There were a lot of times that I didn't, because I didn't like his political philosophy. And at the end of the day, I still think he seems like a nice dude, good dude. Don't agree with him on much, but hey, never hated the man.
Yep. No, I do think in the Trump era, there's, first of all, he's a different personality. There's no question about that. But is also his victory was such a shock that it caused denial, and then that just escalated into this, this ongoing hatred, and which, by the way, he fuels a little bit with his, like I said, he's a different kind of personality. The rallies, the tweets, all that. But it's also the authenticity of those same moments and the same events that many of his supporters like the most about him. So, it's again, I think you're making the relevant point. We all ought to take a breath and take a step back and not just rush to our corners, because what happens, I think, with these Democratic presidential candidates is they want it to be true so badly that they've chosen to believe an allegation that's unsubstantiated.
Yeah. Let's move on. Let's talk about the coal industry. I thought that this was kind of neat, and this jibes with a press release your office sent out on Monday regarding the Energy Department giving us almost $10 million to the state of North Dakota. Basically to the University of North Dakota's Energy and Environmental Research Center. It's for what's called Project Tundra, and essentially it's about using coal energy, but doing something about some of the CO2 emissions. It was really interesting this week, because I guess this is like electric vehicle week or driving electric. I don't know. It's one of those weeks. I can't keep track of them all. But the coal industry, and I did not know this, the Lignite Energy Council in North Dakota has a pro-electric vehicle group. And in fact, they're holding an event. Maybe it was today or maybe it's tomorrow. I don't know. But they're holding an event in Bismarck to promote electric vehicles. And they got like a Tesla that they're driving around. And I think Teslas are cool. I can't afford one. They're not practical for North Dakota. I think pretty soon, one day, they're going to be. I think they're cool. I think electric cars have a bright future in our country.
Sure.
Maybe I'll be wrong. I don't know. But I think it's kind of interesting that the coal industry is teaming up with a bunch of hippies in supporting... I'm not trying to insult anybody, but I'm just trying to be funny here. I mean, you wouldn't think that the coal industry would be backing electric cars, but if you think about it, that increases demand for electricity. And that got me thinking, well, if we do start using electric vehicles, that means we're going to be shifting American power consumption from liquid fuels to the power grid. And that shift means we're going to need more power on the power grid. And the coal guys got to be thinking, great, because we're stable and we're cheap, and and the coal power that we're producing today is cleaner than any other point in history. And we can still get cleaner. I think that those are all important things. And so when we hear about, $10 million for Project Tundra, maybe it's not something that got a lot of attention, but I think this is pretty cool and pretty darn important.
Well, and the irony is very rich, obviously, and maybe if those hippies find out that the coal industry is supporting them, they might reconsider their own positions. Remember, one of the things that's also happening is all this debate over the renewable fuel standard and ethanol policy and the mandates and all those things. And of course, there was a time when the renewable fuel standard was first passed into law in 2007, rather 2005, and then again in 2007, that the environmental community strongly supported ethanol production. Now they don't. Now they actually oppose it because, as it turns out, for various reasons, ethanol is not the utopia they hoped it was. Whatever the situation.
Yeah, I will tell you, I find some praise from some strange quarters when I go on one of my ethanol bashing kicks. So,
I'll bet you do.
Not that I'm bashing ethanol. I don't have a problem with ethanol per se. I just have a problem with anything that the market is created by the government.
Sure.
That's what I struggle with.
So anyway, all of this is happening. But what's also ironic is, remember that electric vehicles get this big tax credit. And now we've just passed this very expensive highway bill that I was telling you about. And the demand for liquid fuels, which provide the nearly all of the money for the highway trust fund through the gas tax and through some excise taxes, suddenly that's not adequate to meet our maintenance and construction demands for our highway system. So what do we do about electric vehicles? And there are people, of course, now talking about some sort of a tax or an excise on electric vehicles, because they ought to be paying for the wear and tear they put on our roads as well. So yeah, there's a lot of irony in it all, but it all gets back to a point that you've made as well or better than anybody, and that again is, whenever the government starts imposing itself on a particular, within an industry, and starts picking the winners and the losers sometimes trade places, and the whole market would be better off if they just would stay out.
And we could be in danger of that with electric cars too. I'm kind of enthusiastic about them. I'm a little dubious of some of the things we've done to promote them. I think, frankly, I think they could probably find their way into the marketplace and market share on their own. But c'est la vie, so it goes. I think there's a future for coal. And it disappoints me when I see so many people, coal's dead, natural gas is going to kill coal, and all these other things. I don't know. We have mountains of the stuff. I mean, we have centuries worth of supply of the stuff. We could get better at using it. That's not a static thing. Our coal plants are cleaner today than they were 20, 30 years ago, and they could be cleaner still in another 2 decades. We can use this stuff, and it's cheap, and it's reliable. So, I mean, why not? I mean, do you think coal's going to survive? I mean, do you think
I do.
Yeah.
I do, Rob. It's not going to survive in the same way it has, obviously, I'd say, but it's going to, and I think it could maybe even make a bit of a comeback in some places for all the reasons that you've stated. But so in addition to the electric vehicle issue, in addition to the things like Project Tundra and other projects that incent the innovators to find solutions, whether it's the CO2 emissions or other kinds of emissions, and we know that they've done it over the years. As long as they can remain in business, they'll find solutions. In addition to all that, today I had a very good meeting with the officials from the Treasury Department to talk about a particular part of the tax code called 45Q. 45Q is an area of the tax code that provides a credit for carbon capture, utilization, and rules around it have been murky, and it's taken taken a while to get to the right type of guidance. But we're very encouraged by the meeting today. Secretary Mnuchin and his team, they put a lot more assets toward clarifying that. So hopefully, we have projects right in North Dakota that capture carbon, CO2, including an ethanol plant. And if that CO2 can be stored in the Bakken and enhance oil recovery, just think you've taken what's considered a waste product now, made it a commodity that has value in the marketplace. Furthermore, so it eliminates the emission. It makes coal more viable in the long run, and it enhances the lifetime and the efficiency and productivity of an oil field. So all of that, we had that discussion just today. Both John Hoven and I have been strong advocates for this. We've written legislation out. We've supported it. So that happens today. At the same time, there's been an announcement who the next FERC, the new FERC chairman or new FERC commissioner, Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner, will be. And FERC has, within its purview, the ability to determine the value. They set rate policy, much like the Public Service Commission does in the state of North Dakota. They do it on a federal level. I've been trying to get them to better understand and better value things like coal and nuclear and natural gas where it's abundant and people want it. These are the only real fuels that can be used for baseload electric generation. There's got to be a benefit, a value given to that benefit, because right now, the policy is biased against those fuels.
Well, that's part of the problem. If we're really going to start, if they can build an electric vehicle that can get me from Minot to Fargo and can recharge faster than an hour, I might buy one because I think they're cool. But if a lot of people like me start buying electric vehicles, windmills aren't going to cut it in terms of providing us all the electricity that we need.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And what's going to happen, and by the way, we've been perilously close already this year, this summer, and winter during the polar vortexes and during the hot streaks in the summer. Texas, California, the northeastern part of the country have all come close to having grid meltdowns or breakdowns as a result of the inability to meet the demand because of these intermittent energy supplies. Now, the intermittent energy production, not only is it intermittent, but it's got preference on the grid. If you're a coal plant, for example, Rob, and you have these markets, these regional markets, they're called independent transmission organizations, and they dispatch all of this electricity based on market signals, but they have these biases built in. And what happens is you bid in a certain amount of electricity a day ahead into the market. If you're a wind company or a wind farm and you're bidding in low-cost electricity, great. But if the wind doesn't blow and you can't deliver on your price, there's no penalty for you. But if you're a coal-powered plant and you bid in a price the day ahead and you somehow can't deliver, say you have a breakdown, a boiler or something, you're penalized for it. So all of the bias is against the reliable generator, and that's a matter of policy. So I'm trying to get FERC to change that policy as well, so that we have a benefit or a value, or in the price scheme, that there's a value for that base load.
Well, absolutely.
So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on.
For sure. Well, Kevin, that's all the time I got for today. Certainly appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Rob.